There is a scientific paper from 1869 that contains an error so fundamental it reads like a joke. Edward Drinker Cope, one of the most prolific paleontologists in American history, published a reconstruction of Elasmosaurus, a marine reptile from the late Cretaceous. The skeleton was long, elegant, clearly predatory. There was one problem. Cope had placed the skull at the end of the animal's tail. The head was on the wrong end. His rival, Othniel Marsh, noticed, and for the next 28 years, until the day Cope died, Marsh never stopped bringing it up. That error is where this story usually starts, but the error is not the story. The story is what happened when two men who were smart enough to reshape an entire scientific field turned out to be petty enough to destroy it in the process. Between 1868 and 1897, Cope and Marsh waged a war across the American West that involved bribery, espionage, fossil theft, career sabotage, newspaper smear campaigns, and the deliberate destruction of excavation sites. They discovered 142 new species of dinosaurs. They also produced decades of errors, misclassifications, and redundant names that took the next generation of scientists more than 50 years to untangle. This is the Bone Wars, and the skull from the opening, the one on the wrong end, is the detail that set the whole thing on fire. The two men met in Berlin in 1864. Cope was 24, Marsh 33. Both were studying natural history in Europe. Cope had been sent by his wealthy Philadelphia Quaker father, partly to advance his education and partly to keep him out of the Civil War draft. Marsh was there on the sponsorship of his uncle, George Peabody, a fabulously wealthy financier who would later endow the Peabody Museum at Yale. Despite their different backgrounds, Cope volatile, brilliant, publishing his first scientific paper at 18, Marsh methodical, politically savvy, raised in poverty after his mother died when he was 3. They became friends. They spent days together in Berlin, visiting collections, trading observations, naming new species after each other. They returned to America on good terms. The friendship lasted 4 years. In 1868, Cope invited Marsh to visit a fossil quarry in Haddonfield, New Jersey, a productive site that Cope had been working. It was meant as a collegial gesture. Marsh accepted the invitation, toured the quarry, and then, without telling Cope, arranged a private deal with the quarry owner to have all future fossils sent directly to Yale. Cope was shut out of his own site. When he found out, the friendship was over, permanently. What followed was not a gradual cooling, it was an ignition. The Elasmosaurus incident came the next year. Cope had already published his reconstruction. Marsh, who had seen the original skeleton, pointed out the error, publicly, in print, with undisguised satisfaction. Cope tried to buy back every copy of the journal containing the error. He did not succeed. The humiliation was total, and Cope never forgot it. From that point forward, the rivalry was not professional. It was personal, and it would consume both of their lives. The real escalation began in 1877, when dinosaur fossils started emerging from the American West in quantities nobody had anticipated. The trigger was a letter. Arthur Lakes, a school teacher and amateur geologist in Morrison, Colorado, found enormous bones protruding from the rock of a formation that would later bear the town's name, the Morrison Formation. Lakes sent samples to both Marsh and Cope. When Marsh discovered that the bones had been shared with his rival, His reaction was immediate and furious. He fired off instructions to Lakes: send everything to Yale, nothing to Philadelphia. Cope received a follow-up letter from Lakes asking for the bones back. The damage was done. Both men now knew that the American West was sitting on a treasure of prehistoric bone, and neither intended to let the other reach it first. 3 sites emerged as the focal points: Morrison, Colorado, Canyon City, Colorado, and Bluff, Wyoming. These became the center of what would later be called the Great Dinosaur Rush. The fossils were enormous: femurs longer than a person is tall, vertebrae the size of watermelons, skulls that suggested animals larger than anything previously imagined. At Canyon City, a local school teacher named O.W. Lucas had been selling fossilized bone to tourists as petrified wood. Cope struck a deal with Lucas: 10 cents per pound of fossil shipped to Philadelphia. Marsh, who had been slow to respond, was now playing catch-up. He dispatched his own man, Benjamin Mudge, to start a rival quarry nearby. Within months, 2 competing dig operations were running within miles of each other in the same Colorado canyon. But Bluff was where the rivalry turned feral. The site was discovered by 2 railroad workers, William Reed and William Carlin, who contacted Marsh first. Marsh sent his crews. Cope, learning of the site, sent his own. For 2 years, from 1877 to 1879, rival teams worked within sight of each other along the same ridge of Jurassic limestone, pulling bones from the ground as fast as they could and shipping them east in crates. The atmosphere was hostile. Workers loyal to Marsh threw rocks and clumps of dirt at Cope's diggers. Equipment disappeared. Shipments were mislabeled or intercepted. Cope managed to persuade William Reed to defect to his side, turning Reed and Carlin, who had started as partners, into enemies as bitter as their employers. The human cost of the bone wars was not limited to Cope and Marsh. It radiated outward into the lives of everyone who worked for them. What emerged from these sites was staggering. Stegosaurus, Diplodocus, Triceratops, and dozens more. Names that would become the foundation of public knowledge about dinosaurs for the next century. But the pace of discovery created its own problems. Both men were racing to name new species before the other could. Cope published at a speed that one paleontologist later described as taxonomic carpet bombing. The result was chaos: species named from fragmentary material, reconstructions based on bones from different animals mixed together, and dozens of names applied to creatures that turned out to be the same species described twice. For every genuine discovery, there was a paper that would need to be retracted, revised, or quietly buried by the next generation. The tactics escalated beyond the quarries. Marsh hired spies to track Cope's movements, referring to him in coded telegrams as Jones. Cope sent agents to infiltrate Marsh's dig sites and report back on what was being found. Bones were hidden. Shipments were mislabeled. Each side routinely buried or destroyed excavation sites after finishing, not to preserve them, but to ensure the other side found nothing useful. The dynamite story has been told wrong for a century. The popular version: Marsh ordered his crews to blow up fossil sites with dynamite to prevent Cope from excavating them. The dramatic version: the one that makes the best documentary. In 2002, paleontologists at the Morrison Natural History Museum went back to the original sites using Arthur Lakes's field notes. Lakes was a geologist who worked for Marsh in the 1870s. What they found was less cinematic, but more revealing. The sites had been filled with dirt and rubble, not dynamited. Lakes and Marsh had spread the rumor of dynamite deliberately, as a deterrent. The threat was more useful than the act. The destruction was real, but the method was deception, not explosion, which, in the context of this rivalry, is entirely consistent. While the field crews fought over bones in Wyoming, Cope was waging a parallel war in print. In 1877, he purchased the American Naturalist, one of the most respected scientific journals in the country, and used it as a platform to publish his own findings at a pace that bordered on reckless, while simultaneously criticizing Marsh's work. Between 1879 and 1880 alone, Cope published 76 papers. Over his career, the total reached roughly 1,400, making him one of the most prolific scientific authors in American history. The speed came at a cost. Many of the species Cope named had already been described by other scientists under different names. The same was true of Marsh. In their rush to outpublish each other, both men created a taxonomic mess. Dozens of species with 2 or 3 names, reconstructions based on mixed-up bones from different animals, classifications that contradicted each other. The field of paleontology would spend the next half-century cleaning it up. Marsh escalated further in 1882 by securing a position as the chief paleontologist of the newly formed United States Geological Survey. The appointment gave him access to federal funding, institutional support, and, critically, political power. He used it to cut Cope off. Federal grants that both men had relied on were redirected. Cope's access to government resources was systematically eliminated. The message was clear. Marsh didn't just want to win the scientific race. He wanted to end Cope's career. Cope was not the type to absorb a blow quietly. He had been keeping a file, a drawer in his desk labeled, with the kind of precision that suggests obsession, Marshiana. Inside, years of collected evidence, errors in Marsh's publications, records of misuse of government funds, accusations of plagiarism, incompetence, and corruption. Cope had been building a case the way other men build retirement funds, systematically, over decades, with no intention of stopping until the moment was right. In 1890, the moment arrived. Cope contacted a freelance journalist at the New York Herald, a newspaper that knew a scandal when it smelled one, and handed over everything. On January 12, 1890, the Herald ran the headline, "Scientists Wage Bitter Warfare." The article was devastating. It exposed not just the rivalry, but the machinery behind it, the bribery of fossil hunters, the theft of specimens, the misuse of federal resources, the petty sabotage that had been going on for 20 years. The scientific community, which had quietly known about the feud, but considered it an internal matter, was forced to watch it play out on the front page of a national newspaper. For 2 weeks, the professors fired accusations at each other in print. Marsh responded with an article titled, "Wrong End Foremost," a reference to the Elasmosaurus, because Marsh never missed the chance to remind Cope of that skull. Other scientists were quoted, sometimes against their will. Reputations that had nothing to do with either man were caught in the blast radius. According to one account, most scientists recoiled at finding the feud had become front-page news, particularly as they found themselves quoted, mentioned, or misspelled. The fallout was mutual and comprehensive. Congress investigated the Geological Survey. Funding was slashed. Marsh's Department of Paleontology was eliminated entirely. His position, his income, and most of his institutional support vanished in the space of a few months. The Smithsonian demanded that he return fossils collected with government funds, using exactly the same argument Marsh had once used against Cope. There is a symmetry there that a novelist would call heavy-handed. Real life is less concerned with subtlety. Cope's situation was worse, but it had been worse for years. After Marsh cut his government funding in the early 1880s, Cope had tried to recover by investing his remaining wealth in a silver mine in New Mexico. The mine went bust. By 1890, separated from his wife and daughter, Cope was living alone in a small Philadelphia apartment, his fossil collection stacked around him in crates, the only assets he had left. He continued to write. He continued to publish. He had no money and no institutional backing, but he had bones and a desk and an anger that never dimmed. Cope died on April 12, 1897. He was 56. His health had been declining for years, likely syphilis, though the records are inconclusive. Before he died, he issued a final challenge to Marsh. Both men should donate their brains to science, to be measured and compared. The bigger brain wins. Marsh declined. At Cope's funeral, there were 6 mourners. His pet tortoise attended. So did his pet Gila monster. This is not a joke. This is the historical record. Marsh survived him by 2 years. He died in 1899, age 67, of pneumonia. He had never married. He was functionally broke. The fossils he left behind, crates of them, many still unopened, would take decades to catalog. The legacy of the Bone Wars is not simple. 142 new species: Stegosaurus, Triceratops, Allosaurus, Diplodocus, names that are now part of the cultural vocabulary of every child who has ever held a plastic dinosaur. Cope and Marsh did not just discover dinosaurs. They made dinosaurs famous. The public's obsession with prehistoric life, the museums, the movies, the merchandise, traces a direct line to the 1870s and 2 men racing across Wyoming. That is the positive ledger. The negative ledger is longer. Decades of misclassified species, bones from different animals assembled into the same skeleton, excavation sites destroyed or abandoned, a generation of younger scientists deterred from field work by the toxic climate the rivalry created. And, perhaps most damaging of all, a demonstration that ego, not evidence, can drive the direction of an entire scientific discipline for 30 years. The skull from the opening, Cope's Elasmosaurus, with the head on the wrong end, is still cited in paleontology textbooks, not as an example of bad science, but as an example of what happens when speed matters more than accuracy. Cope rushed the reconstruction because Marsh was publishing faster. Marsh exposed the error because humiliating Cope was more satisfying than correcting him privately. The skull is still on display. The head is on the right end now. The damage from the rivalry is still being measured. Next time on Buried Record, a woman who built a camera the ocean had never seen before. Edith Witter was told the deep sea was being explored the wrong way. She disagreed. She was right. And the footage she captured connects directly to the giant squid story from 2 episodes ago. That connection is not a coincidence. That story is coming.